And welcome, folks, to this very special edition of Tech Sales Advice, the show for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders that is by design unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. Folks, I've had a lot of very special guests on this show, but I have to say, we are unbelievably delighted to welcome Mr. Michael Fey. We're going to call him Mike now. I don't know if you know Mike. He's the former CTO and GM of McAfee. Maybe a few of you have heard of that. He was the CEO of Blue Coat and the president and COO, former president and COO of Symantec. He's now the co-founder and CEO of a company that some of you may not have heard before, but I have a feeling you will, called Island. In fact, Mike is joining us on the recommendation of my newest colleague, Bill Ballnave. And so I invited Bill to join us. Mike, with that, very subtle introduction and setup, welcome very much, or welcome, to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be here,
my friend.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Bill, you have worked, or you first worked with Mike when?
Man, it's a good question. So I was trying to think about that at 2004, maybe 2003. Yeah, at Mercury Interactive. So I had been an SE for a year and got the opportunity to lead. And Mike went from first line manager to manager of managers. And so I had the luck and privilege of having my first management gig under Mike's tutelage.
Well, and Mike, I was impressed the other day we spoke, and you mentioned that, Chris, I still sort of think of myself as a sales engineer to my core. I spent a minute or two introducing you, but do you mind taking just another minute and sort of sharing a little bit of your story and your journey from sales engineer to now CEO of this company called Island?
Sure. So, I had the good fortune when I decided to go into pre-sales. My father had been in pre-sales. He was with Oracle. And I happened to be an engineer at a large organization. And he won a contest where an armored truck rolled up and gold coins were dropped off at the door. And I happened to open the door. And at that point, I took serious. What are you doing that they drop off gold coins at your door? What is this? My world doesn't work this way. And he explained to me he had won the demo competition at Oracle at the time. And I guess that was their spiff. And I'm like, what is a demo? I don't understand. Why in the world would anybody pay that kind of thing? And then when he explained it, I was even more mystified of why in the world would anyone pay you just to show somebody else's tech? I kept trying to dive in. I'm like, did you write it? Did you make it? Did you invent it? Like, what are you doing? You just use it? Like, how can that be that big a deal? Because isn't the product meant to be used? Like, how is this a big, hard thing? But, as I understood it better and I thought about my own personal strengths and what I enjoy, it seemed like it aligned. So I reached out to a couple companies, and Mercury Interactive was one. They wanted a Java specialist. I was a developer, but not a Java developer. So, I told them, yeah, I can help you out. And then I asked for 4 weeks to start instead of the customary 2 so I could go learn Java. So I spent 4 weeks learning Java and then joined up. And Mercury was a spectacular place. It thrived during the dot-com bust. And what that meant first was it had the pick of the litter of talent. Second, it had to learn how to sell product, when cool, interesting, didn't matter. It had to be undeniable. It had to be able to make it through the CFO, through the CIO, on an ROI only conversation. Yeah. And so we learned how to do that. And whenever we strayed, the market taught us don't do that. And so we all got educated, and I climbed my way up there and ended up moving to Dallas, and leading up a wonderful group of SEs and getting to know some amazing sales leaders. That's where I met Joe Sexton, the famed sales leader through a bunch of my career. We got bought by HP. At the time, I really didn't want to be part of a larger company. So really briefly, I hopped over to Opsware, which got bought by HP, and I saw that going down. And then I had to choose my next jump. And Joe Sexton had called me and said, why don't you join up with me? And what was really interesting about that, and one of the biggest lessons of my career, originally the areas he thought he was going were companies I was excited by. And then he came to me and said, I'm going with this guy named Dave DeWalt over to rebuild McAfee. I thought, antivirus? I don't want anything to do with that. Like that's the product everybody hates, isn't it? Is it even a thing anymore? Like, what's the point? Yeah. But I remember that I enjoyed working with him and for him so much. The idea of working directly for him overweighed my understanding of the technology and the opportunity. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Because the opportunity was amazing once you got in. Cybersecurity was just taking off in a true economic way. McAfee was turning the corner to get back to be a powerhouse. We took leader back in the Gartner quadrant, and we're able to build a massive sales organization as that company grew from delisted to getting bought by Intel for $8 billion. In that journey, I worked my way from pre-sales leader to head of pre-sales, the global head of pre-sales, to global head of pre-sales and services. And germane to this crowd, that was my first opportunity to not only be pre-sales, but own a real P&L. Running pre-sales, you don't own a P&L. Yeah. You own an L, right? You own an expense. Services was my opportunity to team up with brilliant people like Kevin Reardon and others that knew how to run a real business and build products and work on margins and figure out how to govern good business in the middle of trying to sell. So that was a great growth opportunity for me, and I got to work with so many amazing people there that became very important to me throughout my career over and over and over again. Then I was asked to take on the new product edition. So we would buy companies and have to bring them into the organization. And it's always said, every big company has this line said about them. It's where products go to die or whatever.
Right.
And it's never actually true. It's where product identity goes to die often. Very often we think a big company buys something and it goes to die. Its revenue probably doubles or triples, but its identity disappears. So that was my opportunity to work with CEOs of companies we acquired on how to bring them into our organization and leverage our organization for the maximum impact. And I got to work with, with CEOs like Ken Levine and others that ended up being great mentors and friends. Finally, after George left and then Stuart took over and Stuart McClure left, I became CTO of McAfee and then a GM of the enterprise business. So I had our vision and our product, and that was a lot of fun. We got bought by Intel, did that for a while, and then moved over to Blue Coat as president and COO. And that was my first opportunity to truly have a sales force working for me. I was always influential in the sales force, but not actually owned it. And brought Steve Tajan in and others. And we ended up bringing somewhere around 100 to 200 of our McAfee brethren ended up joining us over time. And we grew Blue Coat into a great outcome. Where we ended up getting bought by Symantec. And part of that requirement was that Greg and I, the CEO of Blue Coat, would run Symantec for a couple of years. So did that. Great opportunity, great experience, interesting to see things at that scale. When I finally decided to leave, it was time to do something different. And the startup world seemed like something I hadn't done. Fast forward, Dan Amiga reached out to me. Which was one of the founders of a company we acquired with a great idea. And we decided to team up, and that's how Island was formed. And it's been a wild ride for, 18, 19 months now with me running as CEO and Dan as my partner and CTO.
So I have so many questions for you, but where I'd like to start is early in your career, did you envision CEO? Was that in your mind or in your plan?
Never was. I will tell you, I never needed to be CEO. It was never a requirement. I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to be in the conversations that directly impacted my world. And I wanted to own the world I operated in. So that was really what I strived for, was just an opportunity to be a part of the real conversation rather than just execute on someone else's vision. That leads you to CEO by accident. But it led down that path, and I was very fortunate. I had mentors and people I worked for, which were often one and the same, that allowed me to spread, my wings and do more things. Joe Sexton, for instance, was very special in that dude's very confident in his own abilities.
Yeah.
So he has no fear of letting others be as good as they can be and take on as much as they can take on and be there for you as a backup. That desire to be at the seat at the table and willingness to take risks and go beyond the definition of pre-sales is really what enabled me to be a CEO someday. But the opportunity was teaming up with the right people.
Yeah. Well, and what inspires me listening to you is just how many people you've already mentioned that were important parts of your journey. And the very fact that it was accepting that first opportunity, I guess, with McAfee at the time, right? Because of the relationship and the individual. And look, we hear often that people don't leave companies, they leave people. People don't necessarily go to work for a company. In retrospect, do you ever think that there was a chance that maybe you wouldn't have followed him, or did that never really enter your mind? Like, you know what, I'm going to just follow the people that I know will help me continue to grow.
Sure, I definitely struggled with bigger money elsewhere, often, and leaving that environment. But I really kept a close eye personally what I enjoyed, and what I enjoyed are the people I worked with and for, and the teams we built. And interestingly enough, if you focus on that, when you go take on anything remotely challenging, it's that's going to save you. It's that's going to enable you. So Blue Coat doesn't happen. There aren't billions made for the team there if this army doesn't show up and lean in the way they did. And they showed up because they were taken care of, and they had trust and leadership, and they made money, and people generally cared about each other. So they were willing to leave the confines of their whatever jobs they had and start something new. And that just keeps playing itself out over and over in the career. So while it sometimes wears on you, should you break off and get out of that, there is a time you should, but the power is in those relationships. And you can be the best leader, the best individual, but if people don't join your fight, you lose. And the more that will join that are amazing, the better off you are. And certainly when we founded Island, it was another humbling experience, as we've been able to pull in, a massive amount of people now, 120 something people without any recruiters. It's all people that we know, trust. And when you have that, you can do anything. And it's very special. And pre-sales people in particular are in a great position to do that, because by nature, we help people. We help people get a deal done. We help people sell. We help our customers. We help product marketing understand where things are at. We help we help marketing understand what messages work. We just naturally are in a position to be endearing to a lot of amazing individuals, and leveraging that to a position of trust. It's a natural place for a pre-sales person to go.
Yeah. It's interesting that you use the word natural, because I agree with you. I think there are certain characteristics that those of us that really excel in this profession just we have naturally. But I'm inclined to ask you, did you discover that there were any aspects of the role that didn't come naturally to you, that you had to be very intentional about developing?
Well, I had a leadership coach, Julia, for a decade. And now she's one of my advisors in my company and is a leadership coach to a lot of my people.
Wow.
I would say, I didn't have to fight who I was. but I certainly committed to refining to be better in leadership in particular. It's so funny. A lot of people will think they're a good leader and not actually work on it. Just exist. And it's interesting. There's no other aspect in life you can get away with that. A doctor's not a good doctor without going back for training. A baseball player is not a good baseball player without getting into the cage and working on their swing. And, everything requires that. But for whatever reason, people get promoted to management, and they may naturally be a good leader, but they just don't work on it. So, I can't say there were areas where I felt I was naturally, challenged by, but the growth I felt in leadership and messaging and presentation skills and technical skills, my goodness, it's constant evolution, still is. And if it's not, that's on the individuals, because it should be, it needs to be.
Yeah, well said. Well, especially as technologies change and the selling environment changes, when we have things like global pandemics. And incidentally, speaking of people, Mike, there's a few folks that have chimed in. Ashley Brinsford is with us. Ashley, thanks for chiming in. Nice to hear from you. And I hope I'm saying this name right, Nipank Mehta. I hope I'm saying that right. It's nice for you to be here. And by the way, folks, I do want to invite any of you, if you care to say hello to Mike or ask him any questions, I welcome you to do so. I'm going to push my own pause button. Bill, you've had a chance to obviously work with Mike and watch his progression over the years, and you've heard a few, things that he shared. Any thoughts or questions come to mind for you based on either what Mike has said or just, things that you've observed over the years?
Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah. So it's interesting because Mike, one thing I want to ask you, and then I have a couple of maybe stories to share. When you took that first role as SE, I think you talk about, and by the way, this is the first time I'd heard that story of you saying, "Hey, I'm going to need an extra 2 weeks to learn Java." It doesn't surprise me, because that was kind of always your approach. Like, if I don't know what it is, I'm going to figure it out, kind of while I'm going. But I mean, it seems to me that part of that attitude or that kind of outlook or approach has served you fairly well. Where did you get the gumption to do that?
Well, I got a degree in engineering physics in college. And I always get to say, well, it's not quantum physics.
Yeah.
So I've always had that. Whatever it is, it's not quantum physics. I'll figure it out. But more importantly, over time, it really is a matter of effort when it comes to technology. If you spend the effort, if you spend the time, you can figure it out. You can get it. The other aspects of being great at pre-sales are their own art form. And so the technology is a portion of it. To be frank, it's not the most important portion. We all know amazing engineers that would never be great at pre-sales. They may be phenomenal developers. They may be phenomenal architects. I mean, they may be worth their weight in gold, but maybe they're not good at pre-sales. So once you realize it's your ability to handle objections, to think on your feet, to plan what's about to come at you, and the willingness to put in the effort, the technology is secondary. You got to do it. Like, you got to be great at it, but that's a matter of effort. The other stuff is a little more God-given and a little more of a craft that takes trips to the plate.
Yeah. So as you think then about your transition from engineer to sales engineer, I think there's a bunch of things that probably came to you naturally. What were a couple of things that you needed to really be purposeful about?
Hey, I remember I did my first real demo with Robert Hipp, a sales leader out of Atlanta, and somebody else was supposed to do it actually, and they weren't there.
I remember that name.
And I was presenting in this large boardroom at a company that's now defunct, and I leaned forward on the table to answer a question, and I got up and I left these giant sweat handprints, and it's like everyone in the room stared at it, and I leaned forward to wipe it off, And so I will tell you, I think I was a pretty horrible pre-sales engineer when I started, but people appreciated the effort. They appreciated the commitment, and they knew I would get it done. So they cut me slack. And, one of my earliest reps that I worked with is Bill Gardini, who was one of the first reps I hired at Island. And so these great people give you a chance. If they see you're working hard, if they see you're committed, they see that you've got some talent, they're going to lean in. But you better make the most of it, and you better show, strong progress. And that's what lucked out in the early days. A lot of sweat equity. I was the first one in the office every day. I mean, for most of my career, I've been the first one in the office. People cut you a lot of slack when they know you're working hard.
Yeah, effort. But by the way, a few comments. Jake Wardell says that's the best thing about pre-sales. If someone asks you to go outside your comfort zone, we just jump in, right? We say yes. There was actually one good question, and I apologize to this individual. I don't actually see the name, but I think it's a valuable, worthwhile question. What aspects of business and or leadership do you think we miss out being pre-sales?
So sales in general, go-to-market in general, is utterly blind to the concept of margins, the concept of acceptable expense. We're built to chase deals and do what it takes to get deals done. So the idea of at-scale impact is something we don't often get exposed to in pre-sales and sales, for that matter. So that's one of the areas. And when you extend past that, you do have to start to think about things in a bigger view and more of a prioritized thinking. You could call that a P&L, but honestly, when you first run your first P&L, it's pretty simple. You get it. You understand what you can spend, and you prioritize your spend. But when you start making strategic decisions and trying to see around those corners, it's a little different than chasing down even a complex deal, but thinking about how everything has a ramification back through the industry, back through your areas. So I think that's part of it. So one of the ways that a pre-sales individual can start to exercise this muscle, and I started doing this early on, look at the decisions the companies around you are making and predict the outcome. Get it wrong and figure out why your prediction was wrong. That's the pattern recognition you don't get to do from pre-sales that maybe another part of the organization gets to do. So don't wait to build pattern recognition until you have the role. The problems facing your company, you know them just like everybody else. You probably know the debate that's going on. So what would you choose and why, and what are the positives and negatives out of that? Seeing that play out is a good way to get your mind and skills ready. Then when you do have that meeting with the executive that made that decision, ask them why. Hey, and by the way, I just always tell them it's a good decision regardless. Hey, that was a really interesting decision. Good job. Like, how'd you know to make it? Even if you don't agree with it, hear their logic. See if they're thought about things you weren't aware of, you didn't think about that you should have. That is all phenomenal. And that's that seat at the table concept, that when I finally got a seat at the table and I got to understand the complexity around decision-making, I got a real appreciation for the challenges a CMO faces, or R&D leader faces, or CFO faces. It's just it's a much more diverse set of logic than we have. Get a lead, close a lead, selling the product, get them to use the product. I almost think if this were sports, we're linemen. Open a hole, make it happen, do everything you got to do to make that happen. And eventually you have to step back to play caller and get out of the game. And that's hard to do when you're in the middle of the trenches, just, at a battle.
I'm inspired to ask you, Mike, did you find yourself getting ahead of your skis ever? You mentioned getting a seat at the table. Did you find yourself at times getting that seat at the table? Maybe at times, quote, sitting down with a little too much confidence and maybe learning some valuable lessons as a result?
Without a doubt. You don't know what you don't know. And the humility that you pick up in that journey Certainly not something I possessed in my 20s. But I was fortunate. The leaders I was with definitely appreciated that I had passion, I had conviction, but I had shown always that I would align to the decision. So I could be wrong, and they knew I would be right for them. I would do what was right. And that allowed me to speak my mind without consequence. And I think a lot of people confuse that. My leaders don't want to hear from me. Actually, they do.
Yeah.
What they don't want to is hear after the decision is made and now it's time to execute. Nobody wants that. And so understanding that and making sure that when the decision was made, that I was the first one to go out and explain why it was a great decision, and be behind that, knowing that a well-executed plan always prevails compared to a perfect, you're waiting for perfection. That helped out a lot. But yeah, sure. I walk in stuff all the time. I'm, doing a startup. I mean, this is the first time I've raised money. It's the first time, I've done a lot of things. You get a lot wrong, without a doubt. Guess now I'm just ready for it.
Yeah. I want to double click on what you just said, because I think that's such a critical point that you just made there, which is you need to feel comfortable and confident in having a voice. But if the decision doesn't necessarily go your way, when you leave that room, you got to be on board the train, right? And you've got to be, carrying the flag up the hill, right? I think that's a critical point.
For pre-sales especially, you can't have salespeople that are our friends, they're our partners, doubting what they're doing. It'll show. If they don't believe in what they're selling and why they're selling it and how it'll work or whatever it is, it will show. We're doing them a disservice. A lot of pre-sales people think their job is to be the voice of truth, the voice of reason.
Right.
And I agree with that up until the decision's made. Then it's to be the guys that figure out how to get it done.
Absolutely.
And how to help get it done. And a good company allows for adequate time for people, for the smart pre-sales guys to weigh in, get their voice heard, make sure they hear that, they can internalize it. So, a bad company ignores it. That's not what I'm saying. But, the difference between the pre-sales people that really rose through the ranks and those that didn't, but were both bright, the bright ones that polluted the reps that surrounded them died. They got locked into a bad outcome. Those that built the reps up around them, made them better, made them succeed, they got supported when it was time for them to step up. And you see it all the time, all the time.
Those words are so powerful. Go ahead, Bill. Did you have something?
Chris, I would tell you, I remember Mike.
Hi, Mike. Paul, I hope I'm saying that. Murgatroyd, I hope I'm saying that right.
The Murg.
But he's calling you out. There's another question, but go ahead, Bill. I know you had something that you wanted to share.
No, I was just going to say, I remember a conversation with Mike that went something along the lines of, Bill, do you want to complain or do you want to make money? And I'm like, I think I want to make money, Mike. He's like, all right, then let's get this done.
The exact phrasing of that, I still use it to this day, is rich or proud, choose one. And in pre-sales, we have that a lot. And I started saying it because often I was working with technologists that weren't as strong as my team. And as they would present to them, and the technologist would take an alternate opinion, we would decide we had to prove them wrong. And that was just pride. That wasn't about the bottom line. And that stuck with me. When you focus on pride, it gets in the way of the outcome. And when you're in sales, the outcome is money. As much as we all want to claim it's better than that, it's about money. So rich or proud is something that, I always put out there. And now, of course, we all want to be proud of what we've done.
Of course. We
can be proud at a macro level. But as we make individual decisions, what's best for the business should guide us. That's the rich. Put your pride aside. We actually say that in my current company all the time. Rich or proud, which one?
Yeah, I love it. But by the way, that's a nice segue. Andrew Monahan, I hope I'm saying that right. Any tips for an SE at an early stage company? I don't know if that sounds familiar, Mike.
Yeah.
where now he's saying where the product is immature and can be shaky. I'm sure, Andrew, you're not referring to your own product, But just as a general rule of thumb, any thoughts for Andrew, Mike?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, if you haven't been, I always laughed and said the products that are perfect have the worst paid SEs. The reality is, you want to go be something as an SE, you go to a company that has a product that needs work and that needs you to front end it to make it awesome. That doesn't help for the question asked, but it does state your value. The advice I have for a young company that has a shaky product, and maybe the product is not fully formed yet because they're young. When someone needs something from you, be very clear about what you can achieve, and then if possible, what is going to come down the road. Because what separates a young company from your Fortune 1000 companies or publicly traded companies, you can sell futures. You can talk about what's in the roadmap and what's coming, and you don't corrupt revenue because you're not recognizing revenue like a publicly traded company. When you go to a Symantec or a Microsoft or a whatever, and you start speaking about futures, you've jeopardized the revenue recognition of that deal, and you've now consequently made the deal somewhat worthless to the company. So there's a real control on how to talk about futures. As a young company, you don't have that. So you should keep that there available to you as a weapon to help mitigate some of that risk. The other part that you have to do is get control of every environmental variable you can. It's the demo environment should be a repeatable environment that you have locked down. It shouldn't be one that's constantly trading. And if you can, get your peers to use the same demo environment, not the exact same, but the replica. And the reason I bring this up is a lot of early SEs think their job is to build the best demo better than the guy next to them and the guy next to them. I don't believe that's the case. I think you should be sharing a common demo so everybody can beat on it. So if that product's a little shaky, we've all touched the mistakes enough we can share how to avoid it. Doesn't mean we don't do new things, but we do them, we bring them back to the group so everybody else can get on it and everybody else can be stronger and fitter and better together. That's something I didn't realize early on. I think in the early days of doing demos, I prided on having my own unique, different demo than everybody else. And to be frank, if I saw somebody else do it, I probably wouldn't do it. That's directly in the rich or proud in face of that. So if you find yourself in that scenario, definitely share your demo environment with as many as you can to try to harden it. On the POCs, obviously planning becomes important. But I will tell you, early days, early product, that's why the SE should be getting paid well and have some stock in the company because it's on your back. There's no way around it.
Well, and as I like to say, the best we know the best quote unquote best product doesn't always win. Oftentimes the best demo does. So, right.
Yeah. The best sales teams win very often.
Yeah.
But I will tell you though, you still need a product. I've sold some bad products in my day, and it just means I failed a little bit less than the guy next to me. Failure still eminent if the product's bad.
You tell me the top of the trash can is still trash?
Yep, exactly.
Incidentally, Mike, we also have a question. Our good buddy and colleague Andy Ryan is with us too. Any thoughts on how an individual contributor can quote gain a seat or a voice at the table?
Yeah, hey, the proverbial table's only so big. And if, a leadership meeting contains everybody in the company, it's a kickoff. It's not a meeting. But I've yet to see any good executive that isn't willing to talk about their area with someone who cares, someone who's concerned. So my advice would be, if you have opinions about product marketing or product or sales or whatever, asking for time to discuss it with somebody that you think is worth it, that leader that's a true leader, they will embrace that and they'll bring your views to that table. And eventually they might bring you with them because they feel you articulate your views better than anyone. And I remember that happening to me along the way. I won't say what company, but I felt the strategy we were executing on was one that might not yield our outcome. And I had pitched it to a couple different people, what I thought we should be doing, to people that I thought cared. And lo and behold, one day I was asked to come into the boardroom and explain how I saw the world. And while I think the way I saw the world had many flaws, that room saw me as somebody they wanted to hear from again. And I found myself coming back in more and more. But it didn't start with busting my way into the room. It started by helping the people that were in the room and them finally saying, you know what, I'm not saying it as good as Mike. Let's bring him in. I want you to hear from him. So that's probably the best advice I can give you, if the room is a little far away at the moment.
Yeah. Well, and there's two things that I love about what you said. First of all, they knew that you cared, right? Like, and you know, one of the mistakes I see so many sales engineers make is they want to shoot holes in the product, right? They want to complain and point out all the mistakes. Like, let's do just the opposite, right? It's because we care so much about the company, about the product, about our clients and customers, right? Yeah. And if there are better ways, then let's position it in that way, right? You know, being just a complainer pointing out problems is not going to get that invitation.
You know, one of my favorite SCs out of New York, when I showed up at a company that I was brought in to help fix or help improve, sat me down and let me know all the problems, but then proceeded to tell me the problems that they could sell around. I can deal with that. I can deal with that. These four, I just can't. And they were passionate, and they got angry with R&D and all the stuff that a passionate pre-sales person does. But in the end, they made it really clear about the things that were killing them and the things that they would expect us to fix over time. That vision of clarity made sure that person was on my speed dial for the rest of the time we worked together.
That's powerful. Really powerful. But by the way, just a few other folks chiming in. I think he responded to one of your points, and clearly someone, maybe Saeed is someone you've worked with before. Sounds like he heard you say the rich are proud many times at kickoffs. Mike, I am very eager to ask you a few questions about Island, but before I do, I want to hand the baton over to Bill for just a moment. Bill, was there anything else that you wanted to sort of dig in on with Mike?
Yeah, and I mean, we don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but Mike, it's interesting. My exposure to you is not as an SE. In fact, I don't even think I saw you demo. Maybe I'm going to say that I never saw you demo once. But what I did take away from you was a ton on how to be a good leader. And I think one of the things that I wanted you to be able to share with the audience and with the rest of the group is just maybe talk a little bit about how you made that transition from individual contributor to leader, and then from there to what I would say leader of leaders. And what you had to go through, because quite honestly, you opened my eyes to a ton of things as, and one of those SEs who performed well as an SE, and you jump into a management role and you think, well, I'm just going to keep being a great SE. And you completely flipped me around on that. So how did you come to that and know it?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things to keep in mind. I'm glad you asked, because there's a couple things I always want young leaders to know. One is, if you use the phrase "I'm too old for," switch careers. I'm too old to be doing demos. I'm too old to be writing RFPs. I'm too old to be trapped. Then don't do it. Get out. But if that's what your world is, be ready. Be prepared. The other is, if you're driving a desk, you are waiting to be fired. If you're not out with deals, driving outcomes, fighting the fight with your team, you're out of touch, and it is a matter of time before somebody supplants you. And I saw it happen so often. If you get accidentally caught driving a desk, and by the way, that sometimes happens because of decisions we make, sometimes happens because we take jobs we shouldn't take, that all we can do is drive the desk because we can't add value. So we have to be very careful that we don't drive a desk, that we can see value at the field. So that's the first step, is your team knowing you're going to go to war with them, your team knowing that you're there with them and that you care. The next item is to really appreciate, in order for you to be any good at all, you have to hire people that are better than you and be comfortable with them being better than you, and owning the fact that your victory is that you hired them and they're willing to work for you, not that you're better than them. And that takes a little bit of getting used to, because you probably got your job being better than everybody around you.
Yeah.
But hopefully it doesn't stay that way. And, I think there's that. The other part is being wildly direct. You're so much more efficient if you're direct. And it's so funny when people hear direct, they think of negative feedback, but it's positive as well. Be direct, be quick, so that people know how you feel and they don't sit around guessing. That'll let you recruit and retain amazing people, and let them be direct with you, which solves it. And then just care about how good a leader you are. Just step back and ask, could I have done this better? What else could I do? Am I doing everything I can do for these people? And if the answer is yes, one of the things that really, really drove me when I got to McAfee, I had, Brian Kenyon and Braden Rogers and Kevin Reardon and Wee Win and all these amazing, amazing individuals working for me. If I didn't keep climbing, they had to leave. Mm-hmm. They had to grow their career. So one of the things that always pushed me was, I'm going to keep reaching, and I would tell them what I was trying to take on. And they would lean in and help me succeed, and consequently help them succeed. So I broke the chain of, I need my boss to fail for me to succeed. Mm. And if I look at everywhere I took on, it was those people pushing me up and holding me up. And also my companies knowing, okay, if Mike takes this on, he's got 3 people that can take his role and succeed. So we don't mind him succeeding. We want that. It's better for everybody. That is a fundamental requirement to go far, that you're willing to do that. And you show the people that you aren't leaving them behind. And the only way to do that is to take the risk of showing how great the people that work for you are. And if it all works out.
Mike, I'm inspired to reflect that I feel like I've seen a pattern in some of your comments. You mentioned, the best SEs really elevate and empower their sales counterparts. And we also talked about sharing the demo with your SE counterparts, right? And building that team. And now here you're talking about, as a leader, making, seeing to it that the people above you are succeeding, and you're bringing up all the people. To me, that's, if there's any common pattern there, it's empowering and enabling the people that are around you, whether it's lateral, above, or below. I mean, it sounds like that's really been a very intentional cornerstone or foundation of your career.
It's very selfish. If you do that well, you will succeed. The best people will keep working with you. It's really funny. Those that worry about themselves get Rolex watches. Mm. Those that worry about everybody else give out the Rolex watches. Mm. And I've seen many a great SE that is still 20 years later a great SE, but was always about themselves, and they are good. They can sell a deal. But if you don't make the rest of you better, the other people around you, then why promote you? What's the point? I'm getting exactly what I'm paying for, a good SE for a good outcome.
Yeah.
But those that are force multipliers, they're worth leaning into. And the only way to do that in our world is to, think about how you can help the ones around you. There's no other trick.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really well said. It's a moment ago, you said we're sort of like what did you say? We're sort of like the lineman, right? Yeah. Do you want to stay a lineman, or do you want to become a head coach? Right. That's really what we're saying. Incidentally, I'm guessing a few other folks that know you, a gentleman named Amir Khan is saying hello. A good friend of mine with DocuSigns, Sanu. Actually, Sid Malik asks, I think, a worthwhile question worth considering. How do you think about building and scaling pre-sales teams at a growing startup? Again, something you may know a little bit about these days.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, when we hire the great technical people to our team, we make it really clear that we're going to sweep floors, we're going to do demos, we're going to do whatever. whatever it takes to succeed. And that's a big part of scaling, because you don't have these defined roles. And like, it's funny that the getup that we're on right now, we're testing out the camera and all this stuff. I have one of the most technical gifted people in the world that set this up. This was probably the most expensive, multimedia setup that I could have ever done. But he was the guy in the office that had time to get it done, and he was more than happy to lean in and do that. His name's Jason Trunk, and I promise this is the lowest level thing we would have ever asked him to do, but he's happy to do it. He just wants to add value. So I think as you go to scale that team, make sure every person knows that's their role. Now, discuss with them what you want the role to be long term. I want you to be this architect. I want you to be these things, but we all start here. We all start, engaging with singular customers, doing whatever it takes. So I think understanding what it is to be a startup is a good starting point. And then hiring people that can work together. You have to hire people that are in it for the good. The most wonderful thing about a startup is everybody gets stock and everybody has ownership, which means everybody has an opinion, and everybody has the willingness to call each other out. That's great if they love each other. If they don't, it's chaos. So hire people that play well in the sandbox, that want to see each other succeed, that value each other's success. That's the most important part. And then we ignored location. We didn't care where people are at. We just got the best people on the planet. I didn't care if you're Dean Carey up in Canada or Glenn in California, or I think I've got, a couple different SEs spread from Houston to Austin. They're awesome. We'll figure it out. Down the road, we'll hire specific for the location. But right now, just give me the best people, best outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. If what comes to mind is if you hire the best people, you'll never remember or care about where they are. But if you don't hire the best people, you won't ever forget that you made the wrong choice. Right. So, I think that's critical. That's actually a very good segue. You are in the midst of, I think you said it was really your first startup. Can I trouble you to spend a minute talking a little bit about Island? I'm incredibly intrigued by what you're doing. There may be some folks listening who don't have any idea what you're doing with Island.
I suspect most, but the ones that work for us. So
hopefully.
Yeah, so what we did at Island, we recognized the most widely deployed application on the planet for the enterprise is the browser. But the browser was built for consumers. It integrates to content providers and advertisers, and the definition of privacy, security, productivity are different for my parents and my daughter who use that browser. When we bring that consumer device into the office, we have to wrapper it with all sorts of controls and challenges and capabilities. We have to sync traffic back, break man-in-the-middle traffic to figure out if there's a man in the middle. We have to think about everything that occurs in the browser could be lost out of the browser, and all these challenges show up. So we saw the opportunity with the open source project Chromium, which is now the basis for the major browsers, that we could build an enterprise version of this. And if we did, we could forever change things like BYOD, contractor access. We could rethink the way data stays in a SaaS application opposed to spilling out across the environment. We wouldn't have to bring traffic back to a central point just to try to guess what the heck it was doing. We could implement those controls at a pre-encryption level. And so we ended up doing something that's very elegant, very simple. When you see it, it feels like, wow, why didn't I think of that? We just happened to be bold enough and committed enough to think we could do it. And that goes a lot with our CTO who taught us it was possible. And now every day there's new use cases and new exciting opportunities. So we're very blessed. It's a fun product to sell. It's not like anything I've done. We're not talking about things other people have done. We just get to talk about us and what we do. And it's the most fun demo, most fun presentation of my career. It reminds me back in the days when we brought automated testing to the world and nobody knew what the heck it was. It was just fun. It's just fun to show a new idea, fun to show a different way. And it's a blast to watch these amazing engineers at the customer tell us all the things it can do that we didn't think of. So it's been a fun ride.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, are the folks that you're talking to, are they just blown away by sort of the new possibilities that you're introducing to them?
Yeah, hey, so now that we're out of stealth, some have done their homework before, so they've thought about it, they've internalized it. But in the pre-stealth days, when we got to show people for the first time, it was a blast as people went, wow, I should have thought of that, or that changes a lot. And that's actually how we got our tagline. Sometimes changing one thing changes everything. And that just showed up from doing demos. We would just go out and talk to customers and show them. They go, wow, that changes this and that changes that. So it's no layup. We've got a lot of work to do. There is a big industry we're trying to have an impact on, but we are very blessed. It couldn't be going better for us right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, and I'm inclined to ask. So we're doing this, through a browser. Are you using Island to have this conversation? I
am 100%. Yep, we only use the browser. We use it for everything. It's and I had to log into it. I validated who I was. I'm not on my machine, but I'm on my browser.
I love it.
And all my work assets are available to me, even though I'm not on my machine.
I had a feel. And by the way, this is worth sharing with the audience. Mike and I did not have this conversation beforehand. So he did not know I was going to ask him that. And I had a feeling I knew the answer before I asked. So Mike, and by the way, you have been so unbelievably gracious with your time. And if you can believe it, we're actually over 50 minutes already, and we're going to have to wrap up here in a minute. I have a quick lightning round that I'm going to get to, but Bill, before I get to that, did you have any final questions or any final question for Mike?
You know what? No final questions, but just a huge thanks and nod of appreciation, Mike. And I will tell you, throughout the years, after Mercury and HP, and you went one way and I went another, and all of that, you never said no. You were always ready to help. And I'm very appreciative of that. So thanks for doing this with us.
Oh, thank you.
Mike, I have 3 quick questions. Question number 1, as you reflect on your career, I call this tech sales advice. And frankly, you've given us already just countless little nuggets of advice. But as you reflect on your career, is there any piece of advice in particular that you got along the way that really stuck with you?
I think cataloging what you're good at and making sure you optimize your career to leverage that, and you surround yourself with people that will enable what you're not, very helpful. Very helpful. I think it's tough to do, but when you bring those people to shore you up, you get really strong.
The word that comes to mind is self-awareness. There's power in self-awareness, is there not?
There is infinite power in that, and in confidence as well.
Yeah. Well said. All right, that's question number 1. Question number 2, you and I have just entered an elevator together. Maybe we're wearing our masks, maybe not, depends on what state we're in probably. We're headed up to the 20th floor. I turn to you and I say, oh my gosh, Mike, I just saw you on LinkedIn Live. I just started my first role as a pre-sales engineer. Any advice for me?
There is no limit what you can do. You are obligated, because you own a number, to weigh in on the success of your company. Don't forget it.
I'm gonna replay this and write those words down. Those are powerful.
It's an outrageous thing when you realize you share a quota, and as such, you should care about the marketing message, about the product, about the sales team, about customer support. These are all things you should care about. That doesn't mean they're things you can throw rocks at. It means they're things you should help. They're things that you should concern yourself with. I always felt blessed for picking up a quota early, because I did feel it gave me permission to think beyond my, assigned function, assigned task of the day.
Yeah. To use your words, it gives you permission to care. And and by the way, it also requires you to care. right? I mean, it's a two-way street. Final question, Mike. If you could ask me one question, what might that be?
I could ask you one question. You know, you're interviewing interesting people on these topics. Where does it all go? What's the end game?
You know, I'm glad you asked that, actually, Mike. I think it's a good game. It's a good question. And I have to be perfectly honest. The end game for me is what you and I and Bill have just done right now. If I'm fully honest, I simply love having these conversations. And I love feeling as though the 40 or 50 or however many people we might have on, and we might have a couple thousand folks listen to the recording after the fact. I know that if they listen to 60 minutes of this conversation, they are going to walk away with countless good ideas, inspirations, and that in and of itself is enough of an end game for me. And look,
That's awesome.
I'll share something that a few people have heard me say. If I could get paid to just be the David Letterman for pre-sales on LinkedIn, I would do that. Like, I would more than happy just be the David Letterman of this community, because I just love hearing people's stories. I love hearing about people's journeys. And I think there's gold whenever people open up authentically, as you have done with us today, and share the things that you learned along the way and have made you successful. So honestly, that is really the end game, and that's where it goes. So
awesome.
And it's been an absolute pleasure. Mike, I want to give you the final say. Tell the folks how they can learn a little bit more about Island, and if they're interested, reach out to some of your folks.
Well, certainly, visit island.io. We're going to be hiring a massive amount of pre-sales individuals over the years. But more importantly, just thanks to all the engineers that have helped us get to this point. Not just Island, but all the other victories we've had along the way. I don't know, it's probably thousands of engineers that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. And, it's the best community in software. So thank you all. If you happen to hear this, I appreciate you very much.
Unbelievably powerful words. Mike, thank you again so much. Bill, did you want to say a closing word?
No, I mean, other than I've already said it, thank you. Like, this was fantastic. And I think, everybody that has an opportunity who's been on now or has an opportunity to hear it later will be a little better off, certainly, for hearing from you, Mike. So thanks.
No doubt. Mike, thank you so much. Mike, hang around just for a minute after we close, and then we'll say a proper goodbye. Folks, thank you so much for joining. As always, you can follow and catch all these episodes by following the #TechSalesAdvice. We'll see you next week. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.